Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sam Moulton from the Business Review, and I will be your host. It's our pleasure to have Perstorp with us today, who will be discussing the topic, Learn How to Improve Your Bioplastics Performance. Today's guest speaker is Linda Zellner, Project Manager Bioplastics at Perstorp. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar platform On24. Notice that it's browser-based, so if you disconnect at any point, just click the link you received via email to rejoin the session. In order to ask questions, you can send these in via the Q&A widget. Just type them into the box at the top left-hand corner of the screen and then click Submit to send those in to us. We'll try and allocate around 10 or 15 minutes at the end of the presentation to address any questions or thoughts you have. If you click on the green resources widget, you'll find a couple of PDFs and a link in there from our speaker to view. Please use the help widget if you require any assistance or send me in a message. You can move and resize and maximize any of the windows in front of you in order to get a better view of the slides. But now, without further ado, please let me welcome Linda.
Thank you, Sam. And thanks everyone for joining into this webinar. So it's time to talk about our efforts and contributions in the field of bioplastics. And as Sam said, I'm a project manager for Perstorp, which is a role that combines market development and product development. So it's, in other words, both technical and commercial. And my background is a chemical engineer, and up until now I've been working with material development for almost 15 years, and more or less mainly within biopolymers and bioplastics. So let's move on. The outline for the webinar today, I will mention a couple of words about the company Perstorp and put this company on the map and share the history of the company and where we are today. And then I will discuss Capa for bioplastics, what products we can offer and what they can provide in terms of biopolymer performance. And then I will move on to the processing advantages of using these products and how you can incorporate them to find the optimal performance. And then moving on to end-of-life options and see what we can offer there. And in the very end, I will go through the benefits throughout the value chain, where we are as a company, the challenges and benefits that we try to cover working in this field, and then wrap up with our bioplastic service and then mention a couple of words about the future products. And so it all started in the forest. The company Perstorp was founded in 1881 in the village called Perstorp. And at that time, it was really based on the bio-based products that we had access to in the forest. And then over the years, we moved on to naphtha and petrol-based chemistry, and now we're trying to move back to the bio-based formulas again. And so we are a pioneer in the formalin chemistry. Now we're working and focusing a lot on plastic formulations and solutions, and we are quite strong when it comes to surface materials, coatings, and paints. It has been a family-owned company from 1881, but since 2005, we have been controlled by PAI Partners, which is a private equity company based in France. Last year, we had a turnover of about 10 billion SEK, and I have around 1,500 employees globally. And we have production plants in Europe, Asia, and North America. And the two largest ones are actually located in Sweden, where we also have the main product development and our application laboratories. And so why is a company like Perstorp involved in bioplastic? And as a chemical producer, we need to take a responsibility, and that means that we constantly work with lowering the environmental impact with our products and our processes. And so we look at trying to eliminate toxic ingredients or use less of them, but also lower emissions. And when we work with different types of products, we try to find more sustainable end-of-life alternatives, and that could be either compostability or recycling. And when possible, we are implementing renewable raw materials to reduce the environmental impact. It can also be to introduce new properties in our product, which then will be an added value. Moving on to a more energy efficient system, because we try to look at this from an overall perspective, not only focusing on raw materials and product, but also our processes. And that means also to develop products that has a longer lasting performance when it comes to incorporate them in the end products or in new formulations. And with all these different targets, bioplastics fits perfectly into the sustainable strategy that we are working with. And so it really makes sense to focus on this field. And so then we are going to look at the interesting offers we have here and the product line that we can offer you to make the enhancements in your products. We are making Capa or caprolactones, which is the chemistry, and this is based in the UK, where we have the production site and also where we make the monomers, the polyols, and the polymers. And we are the largest global producer of these products. And since 2011, we have doubled the capacity, which enables us to focus into new fields and to develop products where we see that they have a nice fit and a good contribution to the developments, especially now in bioplastics. And also this year, just to mention, we have a 40-year anniversary since we have developed these products from 1975 and onwards. So it's an interesting development we're looking into and looking ahead of us. With these products and the caprolactone chemistry, I'm mainly focusing on the polymers here, the polycaprolactones. And with these products, we are now focusing on 3 segments within bioplastics. And we believe that focus is essential to really look into the depth of each category to see what we can bring into these segments and also fulfill the requirements and specifications for this type of solutions. And that can vary if it's a film used in agricultural applications or packaging where we need to have food compliant solutions. So the 3 areas we're looking into is packagings, rigid packagings, bags and films, and paper coatings. And so going through the presentation, we'll look into different areas where we see that Capa has an offer and where it's interesting in this type of formulations. And so, going into the details here, really showing you why it's a good solution for your product development. We say it's a biopolymer enhancer. And by that we mean that it's a biodegradable product. So if you're working with biopolymers and are targeting this end-of-life alternative, it's an interesting biopolymer enhancer where you don't have to trade away the end-of-life alternative. Being biodegradable, you can question if this polymer is stable. And this is something we have looked into carefully and also created data, tested it, and we have results which can prove that it is stable in use and will biodegrade once it's in its end-of-life phase. And we have certified it compostability, and when we have tested this, we see it has a really fast biodegradability, which is interesting since it's so stable when it's in use. Also, making different blends using Capa in your formulations, it has gives a nice improvement of the mechanical properties, and it's compatible with many different biopolymers, which is, of course, good when you want to work with formulations and combining these polymers. Thanks to the properties of polycaprolactone, the low melting point, it has a nice and good dispersion, making it easy to add into your formulations and process them. It's not thermally sensitive, and it's not hygroscopic, which means that it's just a product you can add into your formulations and process it, compared to many other biopolymers which are moisture sensitive and thermally sensitive as well. So with that said, we see this as a polymer that can open up new opportunities. By adding it, you can enhance the properties and use your solutions in applications which were not possible or extend it even further. So what does that mean really? When you're working in the packaging business, what kind of benefits do we bring into your solution? Well, looking at the stability of the product, it's hydrolytically stable. So when it's used in packaging and come into contact with different type of foods with various pH, it will not degrade and it will remain stable. And in some cases, it can also stabilize the packaging as such. Thanks to the low glass transition temperature, it will remain flexible in cold environments. So when you add it into formulations used in, for example, trays and other packaging in the freezer or in the refrigerator, it will not crack or break and protect the food at the same time. We have product grades which are food compliant, which is critical when you're working in the field of packaging. It is also grease and moisture resistance, which is key when you use it in this type of applications. It's also consumer friendly, meaning that reducing the brittleness, you can use packaging and they don't crack. You can use them and clean them several times, and by that reduce the wastage too. And so that's an important step when using the packaging, really to get a nice touch and feel of the product and giving the consumer a good impression of it from the packaging and to what's inside of it. And then finally, in the end, when you have used your packaging, you can throw it away and it will biodegrade and you will not add it onto the landfill or the waste problem we have. But it has to fit in that flow, of course. But so it's stable in use and will biodegrade in its end-of-life phase. Of course, we have looked into this, so we have done a lot of testing and created material where we show that what we're stating, we actually have facts behind it. And so when we say that it's a stable product, we have tested it in different pH environments to show you that it doesn't degrade. And here we have tested two of the most commonly used product grades, the Capa 6500 and the Capa 6800, and compared it to a similar polymer, PBAT, but also with a biopolymer, which is commonly used in the field of packaging. And it has been tested at a temperature of 50 degrees at 3 different pH values. And after 7 weeks, we can still see that there are no degradation of the product, whereas there is a high level of degradation of the PLA and the degradation of the PBAT. So this actually shows you that this is a product which fits in packaging applications and in contact with food. And at the same time, being food compliant, it's a polymer that you can work with and improve your packaging solution. Moving on then. What happens with the thermal stability? Working with PLA, for example, we know that it's a thermally sensitive polymer. And from the point when you start processing it, it starts to degrade and you need to stabilize it. And you don't want to introduce another component which might endanger the stability or degrade it or not provide a stable solution in the end. And polycaprolactone, known for its low melting point, you might question, is this something you want to introduce in your solution? And so we have made blends with various addition levels of Capa 6800 in PLA 3052D. And then we have evaluated them from a heat deflection temperature perspective, both using VIKET and HDT. And as you can see, even at higher addition levels as 40%, it doesn't have a big impact on the heat deflection temperature or the VIKET, although the differences in the melting point for PLA, which is around 160, and for this product, for our product, it's 60 degrees. And so that is a very interesting feature. Of course, it can vary a bit depending on the PLA grade you use, and you also have to consider the specification of the application you're targeting in the end. But this gives you a signal that it's coming down to the formulation in the end. We have also looked into what happens if you add different levels of polycaprolactone in a transparent polymer. Polycaprolactone is translucent and milky when you look at it, and that might limit the use in applications where you need to have a transparent appearance. But at the same point, we have seen that by adding lower levels, you can still modify the mechanical properties and still maintain the transparency, which is very interesting for many applications in the serviceware industry. So in this case, around 1.5 to 2% of the PCL 6800 has been added in the 2003D in GEO PLA grade. And it even improves the transparency at this point, and the mechanical properties are much better for a compound which is thermoformed. You eliminate problems with cracking and brittleness in the production, and also over time it makes the product much more stable when it's stored in cold environments. So this is really interesting and something to consider even for transparent products. So you get both toughness and transparency when adding it into your formulation. Moving on to mechanical properties, PLA is suffering from brittleness and cracking, and we have evaluated it, and there have been several studies done also where PCL has been added into PLA to see what it can contribute with. And even at low levels of 5%, you can see a modification of the PLA. But we have also found that when you have working with these low addition levels, like 5% of PCL, there is always a degradation of the PLA in the compounding process. And in some cases, 5% cannot really, it's not balancing this. It's more maintaining the PLA at the starting level. And so you need to go higher, maybe 10 or 15% to really see an impact of the PCL in the compounding step and in the final results of the PLA. This is something you, of course, can optimize with your process and your skills. And this we have tested and will look into further. But if you look at the fracture absorbed energy, you can see a drastic improvement by adding just 15% of PCL in the PLA. And with the impact strength, it's twice as much, which makes it interesting, always keeping the cost balance of your formulation in mind. And as you can see on your right-hand side and on the graph here, you can see the tensile strength, and then you see the elongation at break. And that's the typical, when the more Capa you add into the blend, the higher the elongation at break will be. On the contrary, you will lose the tensile strength. So it's really to balance against these properties to find the right level for the specification and the application that you're targeting. It's very interesting with the compatibility between these polymers, and also when you're processing it, the more PCL you're adding, the better process parameters you will get. But again, you need to look into the application in the end, and also the thermal resistance you need to have on the product or the article you're making. We have also started to evaluate thermoplastic starches, and just for PLA, when working with PCL, we see a reduced moisture sensitivity in the compound, and also a reduction in the thermal sensitivity. And depending on how much PCL you're adding in the final product, you'll balance this against the tensile strength and the elongation. And we've also found when you make films of thermoplastic starch with Capa that it also have a really nice touch and feel in the material, and you can make very soft film applications. As you will see further on, Capa is a very open material, very breathable, and so when you introduce these in the films, you will have a very breathable and soft film to the touch. And so it's very interesting, and also processing it here. At higher levels of Capa, it functions as a processing aid, and so it all comes down to the properties you would like to have of the film in the end. And so if we summarize the different properties of Capa for bioplastic, it has a various range of different properties that are interesting in this field. It can function as a carrier thanks to the low melting point, but also the compatibility to both pigments and different materials. It can be used as a master batch carrier. And with its low melting point, it has a really nice dispersion into the final compound. Capa can also be used in hot melt adhesives. It has a very good adhesion to several different substrates, and thanks to the low melting point, it's also easy to work with and apply. And the higher you go in the temperature, the higher the flow of the product. And we also have a wide range of products with different melt flows, which will contribute to this. And then we move over to the good flow of the product. And as I mentioned, it's easy to apply, and it has a good penetration, and as well as a good dispersion. And this you can balance against the different grades and the melt flows and your application, of course. And you will then have a biodegradable hot melt as well for your packaging. We have certified the Capa grades according to EN 13432, and we are working together with WinSOT, so we have certificates for our products. And by blending the Capa grades with your biopolymers, it can enhance the performance, but it can also tailor-make the rates of biodegradation depending on the end-of-life alternative you're targeting. On top of this, it's also improving the mechanical properties. It improves the toughness and increases the elongation. And as I mentioned a couple of times, the compatibility is a key here as well. And as well as the flexibility. With a good low temperature performance, and it's low TG of 60, it makes the product and maintains the flexibility of the product at low temperatures. So if you're making packagings for ice cream cups or yogurt containers, it will make them less sensitive and reduce the brittleness when they're used. It also enables a blending at low temperatures thanks to the low melting point. So if you're working with components which are temperature sensitive, like fibers or other biofillers, this is another benefit to consider. And especially also with carriers, you can make the master batch preparations at around even as low temperatures as 60 degrees, which is the melting point of Capa. So you have a broad range of different properties which you can consider and get some ideas and inspiration for your applications. With this in mind, we have also compared this product to other products used in this field. For example, PBAT, which is a similar component, and then PLA. And as you can see, the density is somewhat lower than both of these components. And it's the same for all of our Capa grades, as well as the melting point and the glass transition temperature. The properties of polycaprolactone is very much molecular weight dependent. So the higher the molecular weight, this will have an influence on the E modulus. As you can see, you will have a softer product, and you will have a modified tensile strength, as well as the elongation at break. Not a big difference, but it will be noticeable depending on how much you're introducing in your formulation. A big difference if you look at these polymers is, of course, the melting point. And so this has to be considered depending on the application you're targeting and how much you're adding into your formulation in the end. And as you saw before, the heat deflection temperature is still around 52 degrees, whereas a melting point for PLA is around 152. The heat deflection temperature is still 55. So this is worth to note. And then we have, based on the grades, we have different melt flow indexes. So this can also be selected depending on the targeted application and the properties you need. And all of these tests have been performed on 250 micron films to be able to compare them to one another. When we looked at the starch blends early on, I mentioned that polycaprolactone is a very open and breathable material. And here you have an overview of different materials as well as PCL. And as you can see, it is very breathable. But in most cases, when you work with film applications, it's very seldom you just have one layer. And so many times you can combine several layers to still achieve the barrier properties that you're targeting. But being a breathable material doesn't always have to be a drawback, because it can fit into applications like mulch films or applications where you want to avoid condensation and, for example, keep the food fresh. And then there are applications, of course, where the barrier properties are not as crucial, like stretch films, for example. And we have also done some comparisons when it comes to water vapor permeability, where we have included some other polymers like PLA and TPS, as well as PBAT on the right-hand side, to get an overview with the most commonly used polymers in this field today. They are not included in the graphs next to it. So you can get an idea or find a comparable material, and also how you can formulate to improve these barriers. But in most cases, you combine multiple layers, so you can still introduce a biodegradable component or a bio-based component, and in the end, achieve the barrier you're targeting. So, I have given you an overview of the properties and some ideas on how you can use our products and what they can offer in your different biopolymer solutions. And so now I would like to go into the processing advantages of these products. Thanks to the low melting point and the stability of the product, it's very easy to process and introduce into your formulations. One thing you need to be aware of is that the low melting point can be a challenge sometimes, and you need to lower the temperature in the hopper to avoid that it clogs it or gets sticky. But apart from that, it has a very nice dispersion and a processability into the different formulations we have worked with. It has a very broad processing window. So compared to many other biopolymers, it will be the least sensitive component. Working with starches or PLA, they are very sensitive, and if they have a very long residual residence time in the extruder, you will notice this either on the smell or the color. But here, the PCL will be the least sensitive one. Another benefit is also that it's hydrophobic, which means that you do not need to pre-dry it as you do have to with PLA or starches, for example. And here PLA is very sensitive, but by introducing the PCL into your compound, it reduces some of the moisture sensitivity, and it also improves the further downstream processing of your compound. The low melting point that I touched upon earlier, it is also good working with these temperature-sensitive materials, and depending on the grades you're working with and their melting point, it could be possible to lower your processing temperature and gain some energy reduction based on that. These products can also be sterilized by gamma rays, but it all depends on the conditions, of course. And thanks to that, it has a very good adhesion to a multiple of substrates like leather, cardboard, paper. It's also possible to heat laminate this onto these different materials. And if we think about addition levels, working with, for example, PLA and films based on biopolymers, we usually suggest that an addition level of around 20 to 30% of PLA in injection molded formulations, and working with starch and PLA. And for films, for example, thermoplastic starch, we suggest to add around 15 to 30% of of PCl to obtain an improvement in the properties, reduce the brittleness, and introduce elongation into your films that you're making. Talking about the thermostability, we have done some tests in our lab really to create the proof of this. And here we have tested the Capa 6500. It has a molecular weight of around 50,000, and we have stored it at a temperature of 120 degrees and another sample at a temperature of 160 degrees during 7 days, 48 hours, and 6 hours, really to have different cases to show that it's not degrading or anything, or there are any bigger degradations of the polymers. And that is a quite long time if we want to compare it to the residence time in an extruder, although the temperatures are usually higher, around 190 degrees. You still see that it's stable even after 7 days at a temperature of 120 degrees. And that is a very good property if you compare to other biopolymers, for example. And so to wrap up on the processing features, as I mentioned, it's a very nice master batch carrier alternative where you can introduce pigments, inorganic, organic pigments, and use it in applications which are targeting biodegradability. And depending on the applications, if you're injection molding articles or if you're making films, you can select the product with a melt flow index that fits the compound you're making. All of these grades are biodegradable, and we have certified 2 of them compostable. But we can get these certificates for all grades if that's requested. We also have food contact grades, which are food compliant based on the EU regulations, but we are currently also working on getting an FDA application and file it for an FDA approval as well. Working with these polymers, you will also notice that they are odor-free. If you compare it with PLA, for example, where you can have a slight smell of popcorn, for example, or if you work with starches, it can smell like you're baking cookies. But not to say it's a problem, but it's odor-free, which could be interesting to know. And so, as I've been mentioned a couple of times, it's a biodegradable polymer, and now we will look into the end-of-life options of these grades. We have tested according to the standard EN 13432 at a test institute here in Sweden to have the test results and the proof of, to be able to show that it actually is compostable. And so this we have done, and with that test we can actually show that within 45 days, under the right conditions, it's 100% biodegradable and compostable. And comparing with, for example, PBAT, which is a similar polymer, you can see that it's actually biodegrading very rapidly. And still, at the same time, it's very durable and stable when it's in use, which is critical because you want to be sure that the products where you're using this solution won't degrade or be destroyed when they are in use. The latest studies that we did last year together with Fraunhofer Umsicht also showed that this polymer is biodegradable under anaerobic digestion or anaerobic environment, which means there is no access to oxygen. And this is especially interesting if you're collecting organic waste and they are sorted into a biogas production facility. And so with this test performed, we can show that within 77 days, the biodegradation is reaching its plateau, and more or less the entire sample has biodegraded under these pretty tough conditions as well, which is very good because that means that you really can select or use this polymer together with other biopolymers, and they can end up either in a composting facility or in biogas production and still biodegrade. And so now the benefits throughout the value chain. How are we addressing the development of bioplastics as a raw material producer? Being very much upstream, it can be challenging from time to time to know and understand the market needs and the requirements in each step of the value chain. And so that really requires that we understand how many steps there are and who are our customers and the customers of our customers, to develop the product in the right direction and also make sure we fulfill the requirements that are needed in each step. And for this, we have tried to map the different requirements and needs. And I'm not saying that we have understood it fully or this is the correct way to do it, but it's a way for us to move ahead and get one step further in our development. So what we are offering from our perspective and the product benefits from our side to a compounder, then we have mapped some of these properties and made a chart of them. So really to be able to support the compounders with the different technical data and the requirements that they need. If we then think of the compounders and what they need to have or how to facilitate for them, there are other requirements that are added on to the product as such. And that's, for example, that it needs to be easy to process, and it's a benefit that you don't need to pre-dry it. Depending on the compounds that they are making, they need to have food compliant alternatives, and they need to find a good solution that cover many of these aspects to not introduce too many components in the final product. Moving ahead and looking at the converters, which could be film makers, paper coaters, or sheet manufacturers, and what we call semi-finished products. There we need to consider what type of properties and features that are important for them and trying to map them down as well. And this we can do and moving along throughout the entire value chain and even coming down to the brand owners in the end, as well as the waste management. And especially for the brand owners making a product and they put it in the packaging, they want to make sure that the first impression will last. It will protect the product, the food, the chocolate, or whatever they are making, and not take any risks of something migrating into the product. And so that really is important for us to study the value chain and understand what's required in each step, to know and understand this so that we are really developing our product in the right direction and we have a full offering for these customers. And then in the very end, also consider where this product might end up. Will it be composted? Will it go into biogas production? And also, if we can, reduce the waste and so we don't contribute to more at least. And so what can we do? What can Perstorp do as a company, and how can we support your product development? This year we have introduced a twin screw extruder in our lab, which enables us to do several different compounds and introduce new components to really optimize and fine-tune the solutions for you. We also have a pilot plant based in Warrington where we can make smaller trials of new products and also samples for you to evaluate. We have a big team of 7 people, specialists and lab engineers, which are working on testing and evaluating these new product solutions. And we have a very high-tech analytical lab that also can do the characterizing and look into and simulate some different problems that you might run into. So we really can find answers and provide the solution for you. And so this is really a strength and a new phase for us that we have entered into. And we look forward to collaborate with you because that's how we see we can build know-how and also to understand the need of this type of products in the market. And so what does the future look like? We know by now that the renewable-based content is another interesting feature, and for us, it doesn't not only mean that we are introducing bio-based content. It also is a way for us to modify our existing products. It will fill a gap, and we can provide new and exciting product solutions as on top of the ones we already have. So for us, we are starting to look into copolymers of Capa and lactides. And so this is a chemistry we are familiar with. Caprolactones, we are working with and ring opening, polymerizing them. And the lactides, we also are ring opening. And so by combining these two monomers, we can tailor make new polymers, introduce renewable-based raw material, and at the same time adjust the melting point, the crystallinity, make more transparent products, adjust the viscosity depending on the application the product will be used in. And so it's opening up many new opportunities for us. And we can really find new and fine-tune performance with these products. And it will be a very good complement to the products we already have. And these products will behave very differently to the Capa standard grades we have today. And so it will be really interesting to develop these products further. So looking at the Capa for bioplastic products, we today offer a range of 7 products. And we have an overview of all of them, so you can pick the one which fits your product or the challenge you're facing to modify and test it to see if it fulfills your requirements. And we work with samples, and we also work with collaborations where we can make the compounds and evaluate them together with you. And here you can see that we have tested the melt flow index at 80 degrees and at 160 degrees, really to show how the product is behaving at a lower temperature. You can get an idea and compare it to, for example, polyethylene here with this melt flow index. Important is also to have approvals and certificates for these products if you're working with packaging. And the product is approved for its food compliance within Europe, and we are currently working on having an FDA approval as well. We're just about to file the documents here. And as you can see here also, we have been sought certifications for compostability and also both the OK Compost certificate as together with the seedling here. And these products are the Capa 6500 and the Capa 6800. They are also TOY compliant. So with that said, thank you very much for listening, and I hope you find this product range very interesting and it might offer you the solution that you are looking for. And now I will hand over to Sam so we can start to look into all of your questions.
Thank you. So yeah, it's time for our Q&A session. I told you at the start, but I'll just give you a quick reminder of how to send those in. You should see the white questions box at the top left-hand corner. Just type them in there and then click submit. We've already got plenty in, so I can dive straight into those. And the first one I'm going to go to is, what is the compatibility of caprolactone with starch polymers?
It has a good compatibility with thermoplastic starch, and you can blend it in various ranges of PCL from 20% up to 50%, really depending on your application and the properties that you're targeting. So it has a good compatibility.
Okay, thank you. And the next one says, you said that Capa is more stable than PLA. PLA is not compostable in home conditions. And for Capa, so is Capa?
We do not have any certificates as of now, but based on the behavior of the product, I would think that it would pass the testing, but we do not have the certificate. But it's something that we are considering. And I can add that based on the melting point and the structure of PCL, that is a benefit when it comes to biodegradation, and it starts enzymatically, and the microorganisms really like to chew on Capa, and so that's how the biodegradation process is initiated, followed by hydrolytical degradation. So that's also why the product is so stable in use.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep.
Next one is, what is the stability against microbial degradation?
Yeah, well, when it's out in the soil or in the compost, then it will start to biodegrade. It has a sort of a lag phase, but once it starts to be attacked, then the degradation process is quite rapid, followed by the hydrolytical degradation. So where there are microorganisms, yeah, then it will start to biodegrade.
Thank you. Is Capa available in micro or nanocrystalline form?
No, no, not at the moment. We have one grade 6506, which comes in a powder. That's what we have compared to the others, which are coming as granules. That might be interesting if you are looking for a better dispersion or even easier processing, and also as a master batch carrier, if you would like to work with powders instead of granules.
Thank you. Next one, quick, simple one. What is Capa made from? Is it synthetic?
It's a petro-based product, yeah. So it's made from cyclohexanone. And so we're looking into alternatives of making a bio-based caprolactone, but at the same time we are now also making these copolymers to introduce the bio-based content, and on top of that then also gain some new properties of these new products. So this is something we're looking into, but when these products will be available is difficult to say at the moment.
Thank you. What is the degradation rate in soil?
Oh, in soil. Well, it's difficult to say. I mean, it's under controlled conditions. According to EN 13432, the degradation rate is approximately 45 days at a temperature of around 65 degrees. In the soil, I would assume that it will take somewhat longer for the PCL to biodegrade due to the lower temperature and the conditions there. It's difficult to state an exact figure without testing it, but it will take longer.
Okay, thank you. This is a two-part one. What is the size distribution of the bioplastic? Is it possible to pulverize into powder?
Yes, it's. The size distribution. I don't know from the top of my head. We have data on that one, but it's possible to grind it. It's cryogenically grounded into a powder, so we do have a powdered grade, and depending on requirements, specifications, and we can also make more powdered grades, of course.
Thanks. Next one is Capa can be used as coating for paper. Is paper still recyclable after coating with Capa, and to what extent?
Ooh, that's a difficult question. That is not something we have looked into, actually. We have just considered it to be used in papers that are meant to be composted in the end. It's a very good question and something that I will consider, but I cannot answer anything about that at the moment.
Okay. Someone's just asking about 65 degrees Celsius. Do you understand that question?
65 degrees Celsius. What will happen to the product, or
just it 65 will... degrees. Sorry.
Oh,
I
didn't
just
follow
65
you.
degrees Celsius. Sorry, I don't know if you know what they're referring to.
No, I don't know actually.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Next one is regarding food approval. Do you have any FDA approvals for these grades?
We are currently working on that, and we are just filing the documents and the samples. So by the end of the year, we might have a first indication, but these processes and procedures can take a while. But with this process, that means that we will have if we get it, we will have an FDA approval for 6,400 and upwards of the grades that we have available. So this is something which is very important for us and something that we really prioritize.
Thank you. Next up is, how can the product still be so stable and at the same time biodegrade at such a high rate?
Well, this is really linked to the fact that it is thermally stable and hydrolytically stable and in use. And when it ends up in a compost or in the soil, it's really that the microorganisms there, they really like to biodegrade polycaprolactone. So the whole process is initially started by enzymatical biodegradation and then followed by a hydrolytical degradation compared to PLA, for example, which is quite sensitive to hydrolytical degradation, and it can catalyze its own degradation, whereas PCL won't. So it's really linked to this. When it ends up in the right conditions in the soil and you have microorganisms, that will initiate the biodegradation. And as long as it's in use and under conditions which are not challenging the general properties of the product, it will remain stable.
Thank you. Next one is, are you able to prepare smaller batches of bioplastic compounds using your products for initial trials?
Yeah, that would be possible. From the beginning of the year, we just got the twin screw extruder where we can prepare and make compounds based on the PCL chemistry and make them incorporate PCL in PLA or starch compounds or different types of compounds and support that type of development. If you need a smaller amount for testing, if you're not able to prepare this yourself, or to just get a first feeling of the compound and if it might fulfill your specifications or the properties that you're looking for. So yeah, that would be possible, and that's something which we are targeting so we can help the customers and build our own know-how at the same time.
Thank you. Next one is, what are the recommended processing temperatures for Capa when used as a master batch carrier?
It really depends on the components that you use. We have prepared some master batches where we really processed them at 60 degrees. So you just about have you soften up the Capa and you can incorporate the pigments and the fillers or the calcium carbonate that you use. And generally, when adding PCL into your formulations, we suggest that you start with a setting the recommended processing settings, for example, PLA or the starch, and then incorporate the PCL. And you just have to be careful with the dosing so it doesn't clog the hopper or melts when you're feeding it into your compound. But in most cases, PCL will be the more stable component in these applications. And so start with the settings for the main matrix, the TPS or the PLA, or the most sensitive components in your formulation.
Thank you. Next up, go to are all grades biodegradable, and which certificates do you have for compostability?
All of the grades are Sorry?
Sorry, go on.
All of the grades are biodegradable. We have decided to certify 2 of them only at this point. It's the 6500 and the 6800 because they are the most commonly used ones here in these type of applications. And we have the seedling and the OK compost certificates from Vinsot currently.
Thank you. Next one is, which additional levels do you suggest to modify PLL grades and improve the mechanical properties for injection molded articles?
Okay. It depends on how much you would like to modify the properties, but I suggest that in injection molding grades you can add around between 10 to 30% of the PCL to see if you reach the mechanical properties that you would like to improve. You cannot sometimes go lower, but it all has to do with your extruder setup and the screw configuration and the proper dispersion, and so that the PLA is not degraded, and then that takes out the properties that PCL are contributing with, and so it's a balance. It really depends, but for injection molding, you can go as high as 30%. But then having in mind where this application will be used, of course. But then you can also measure the heat deflection temperature to see if it has any negative impact on this, or if it will remain on the level which is acceptable. But there you can adjust the addition level and fine-tune it so you achieve the properties you're looking for.
We're coming towards our last few questions now. Next one I've got is, which processing settings do you recommend for your Capa products and for blends using Capa?
I touched upon this topic a little bit before. Well, in the feed zone, I suggest that you have 50 degrees or less. But then when it comes to adding it into your compound, it really depends on the components, for example, PLA and TPS, which is the major part of the matrix. And then I suggest to start out with those settings and then fine-tune based on the properties or really the quality of the strand coming out in the pellets. So either increase the temperatures or go down or adjust the RPM of your extruder so you really get the best dispersion of your product. And so that's my best suggestion, because in these bioplastic formulations, the PCL will be the least sensitive component.
Okay, thank you very much. So that brings us to the end of the question and answer session and at the end of the webinar. So thank you for sending in all your questions. We got through lots of them, and thank you for answering them. Again, just leaves me to thank Linda for what was a great presentation and Perstorp for sponsoring this session. To all the attendees, you'll receive an email shortly in a couple of hours telling you how you can access the on-demand version of the webinar, or you can find this on our website, which is www.business-review-webinars.com. We look forward to sharing further webinars with you, so keep an eye on the website I just mentioned. Follow us on Twitter, which is @BRWebinars for daily updates, and join our LinkedIn group, Business Review Webinars. Apart from that, thank you once again. I hope you all have a nice day.
Thank you all. and goodbye.